History is all around us. There are secrets of our past around every corner, hidden in our street names, buried under our feet. And in this series, I'm going to be uncovering these secrets by exploring Britain's most historic towns. This is the original Roman. I want to discover which towns across the UK can claim to reveal the most about each period in British history. It is terrifying. I'll be deciphering clues in familiar landscapes, bringing lost landmarks back to life and peeling away the layers to reveal a unique view of these towns in all their former glory. Oh, look at this, look at this. From the Vikings to the Victorians, the Romans to the Tudors, I'll reveal the story of an era through the story of a single town. This week, I'm taking a short step back in time to visit Britain's most Victorian town. This is tiny. In the 19th century, the Victorians revolutionised Britain. This place is absolutely gorgeous. I'm heading to a city that was transformed in a single generation, from little more than a village to an industrial powerhouse. It just increases year on year. By the end of Victoria's reign, it boasted so many textile mills that it was nicknamed Linenopolis. And its shipyards would go on to build the world's most iconic liner. If you want to understand the Victorians, Belfast is the perfect place to be. Modern Belfast is emerging from the shadow cast by sectarian violence. Now the city is on the up, a place that attracts people for both work and pleasure. Much of its appeal lies in its grand industrial past. Belfast grew into a city during the transformative reign of Queen Victoria. Early on in her reign, Queen Victoria toured around Ireland, and back then, Belfast was a small, fairly insignificant town. She spent just a few hours here. But half a century later, at the end of her reign, it was almost unrecognisable. The population had grown sixfold. It had become the shipbuilding capital of the British Empire, the place that would build the Titanic. And what I want to find out is how Belfast became so utterly transformed within a single lifetime. Belfast is now home to over 300,000 people. But when Queen Victoria came to the throne in 1837, it was a fairly insignificant town with a population of around 50,000. And there was no sign of the great harbour that was to play such a crucial role in the city's destiny. My journey into the Victorian age begins here on the river. Derek Booker, a local maritime expert, is taking me out on the Lagan and back in time. So Derek, if we had been sailing into Belfast, say in 1800, how different would it have been?
Well, for a start, this where you are right now would have been land, swampland. That there would have been marshland over there. It would have been smoke and haze and fog. So it would have been a dark, dank city.
Quite a small city at that point?
Oh yeah, a village. It wasn't until the port opened up that it became a city, and it expanded and expanded ever since.
To give me the full experience of approaching Belfast by boat, Derek is rather bravely entrusting me with the wheel. Okay. So I am now sailing this boat. I am the skipper of the Mona.
Yeah, you got the job.
Yeah, all right.
So that lamppost up there is where you want to get with the real car.
That one.
Yeah, lined up.
Gone too far.
That's the hardest.
I think it's definitely time to hand over control of the boat. The city might have moved on, but it's good to see that Victorian manners still survive on the high seas.
Pleasure having you aboard.
Lovely, thank you.
Just watch now the step.
But what I'm interested in is Belfast's much more radical redevelopment in the Victorian period. Across the UK, the Industrial Revolution saw traditional industries completely transformed. In Belfast, a major manufacturing industry was linen. This is how linen starts, as a humble crop, flax. Flax likes cool, damp conditions and thrived in the Northern Irish countryside. One of the oldest cultivated crops, it's good for two things: the production of linseed oil and linen. Flax has grown in Ireland for more than 3,000 years, and for centuries the spinning and weaving of flax would have been something that was done by hand at home. To discover how this cottage industry was transformed by the Victorians, I've come to the Irish Linen Centre to meet guide Philip Simpson. Philip, take me through how you make linen from the very start, because you begin with flax.
You do. There's a lot of processes involved in it. Flax, when it's first grown, grows like a grass. It's a tall plant, about a metre high.
Right.
And once it's soaked, the woody part comes off more easily, and the fibres start to separate from the plant.
Oh, yeah? Yeah.
It's one of the strongest naturally occurring plant fibres on Earth.
Yeah, I've just broken it.
Yeah. Certainly when
But it is quite strong.
It's when you twist it together and you form a yarn or a thread, that's where it gets its strength from.
Philip is combing the flax to straighten the fibres and strip out short and broken ones. The long, smooth fibres that remain can then be twisted into a yarn through spinning. Producing linen like this was a way of life for whole families in the Irish countryside.
Generally, the girls would have been the spinners and the males would have been the weavers. And certainly in this part of Ireland, most of the girls would have known how to spin from a very young age, probably maybe 6 or 7 years old, and by about 9 or 10, they would have been proficient spinners, and they would have spun all daylight hours.
Well, if young girls could do it, I'm sure it'll be a doddle for me.
Okay, so all you're doing is you're treadling the wheel, you're drawing the flax down with your left hand, and you're feeling for the twist with your right hand.
Okay.
Use your toes more than your foot. That's it. And then you let it go through.
Oh, I can't do it smoothly at all. Right. I can get the wheel going. I'm not doing anything with my hands
That's
at the
okay,
moment.
keep going at the minute.
Okay. Relax now, drop the shoulders. It is like trying to pat your head and rub your tummy at the same time.
A little faster, perfect.
Oh, it's gone. I'm frustrated by this. I clearly need more practice. And spinning the flax is just the start. To make linen, the yarn needs to be woven on a loom. For centuries, something which was also done by hand. But that was about to change with the harnessing of a new source of power. The invention of the steam engine allowed people and goods to travel further and faster than ever before, but it would also have a massive impact on the workplace. To get a better idea of how that revolution transformed traditional manufacturing industries and the lives of Victorian workers, Philip is taking me to an abandoned mill that began operating in the 1870s. It's quite eerie, isn't it?
It's got an atmosphere about it, certainly.
It's an extraordinary place, a moment of history frozen in time, as if the workers walked out, leaving their looms only yesterday. What do you think the conditions would have been like in a Victorian mill?
Very hot, with the steam, very humid. People would have had a lot of breathing problems and things like that because of the dust that came off it. Their toenails would have got infected and dropped off because of the constant damp, you know, almost like a trench foot.
So would they have been in bare feet then?
Bare feet, absolutely. And injuries were very common, but that was part and parcel of it. And human life back then was disposable, basically. If you didn't work, you didn't get paid. And quite often, if you worked in a mill or a factory like this, the house that you lived in would have been provided by the mill owner. So if you couldn't work in the mill or the factory, you didn't live in the house either.
So why do people do it? It seems like a terrible occupation.
There's not really much you can do about it. I mean, mills could produce yarn more cheaply than a hand spinner could. So hand spinning basically died out within about 20 to 30 years. It was so
literally
quick.
outcompeted.
Very, very
Yeah.
quickly, absolutely.
The impact of industrial mechanisation on the workers of Victorian Britain was immense, and Belfast was no exception.
But about 1 in 10 of the population of Belfast would have been employed in linen of one form or another, be it growing or processing or spinning or weaving. So it was absolutely colossal.
When the American Civil War led to a worldwide shortage of cotton, the demand for linen soared. Soon, Belfast was the biggest producer in the world. It was nicknamed Linenopolis. Belfast was a perfect example of a Victorian town in transition. By the end of the century, Belfast boasted the largest linen mill on the planet. It stood here on the site of this modern shopping centre, and we can now bring it to life. The mill is made up of several different buildings staffed by 5,000 workers. It's a vast complex, but the real technological innovation is found inside. It's got the latest machinery, capable of carrying out almost every stage in the manufacture of linen. Inside the factory, steam power fuels 1,000 looms on its weaving floors. Vast industrial buildings like this would transform towns and working lives across the UK. For a different perspective on the development of Britain's towns, I'm working with aerial archaeologist Ben Robinson.
Left turn east, runway 22, clear for takeoff, surface wind 23014.
He's taking to the skies to see how the booming industries would transform this Victorian town.
Growing Belfast couldn't rely on the natural resources around it to sustain it. It had to have a good harbour. Everything had to be brought in. A Victorian city needs iron, it needs steel, it needs coal. The river used to wind its way tortuously to the sea, much more so than it does today. And it was very difficult for boat traffic to get anywhere near the town.
In 1839, engineers came up with a solution. They decided to cut a deep, wide, straight channel from the centre of Belfast docks to the open sea. With Belfast's mill owners and other industrialists wielding influence over port authorities, permission for this massive undertaking was easy to secure.
It was a masterpiece of Victorian engineering. Without that harbour, Belfast City just couldn't have developed at all.
In honour of the Queen, the project was named the Victoria Channel. Victorian innovation was making Belfast into a thriving town with the best harbour in Ireland. But how did it become a shipbuilding powerhouse, serving the greatest empire on earth? I want to understand how the Victorians transformed Britain, and there's no better example than Belfast. I've already seen how the mechanisation of traditional industries transformed the cities of 19th century Britain. It's quite eerie, isn't it? In Belfast, the booming linen industry would drive development of the harbour, and that would provide a home for another industry that epitomises Victorian ingenuity. Belfast is, of course, famous for the magnificent but ill-fated Titanic. But that disaster threatens to eclipse the success story of Belfast's Victorian shipbuilding heritage. And that was all started by a young genius called Edward Harland. Harland arrived in Belfast in the 1850s, soon after that new channel had been cut to create the deep-water port. The mud dredged from the river had created Queen's Island, where he set up shop. He was laying the foundations for an industry that would leave its mark on Belfast. The shipyard cranes still dominate the city's skyline. Harland's former offices are now being converted into a luxury hotel. You must be Tom.
Oh, pleased to meet you, Alice.
Lovely to meet you. So I have to put this Tom McCluskey is a former engineer with the company, and he knows how Harland turned what was a muddy wasteland into a shipbuilding empire.
Well, Alice, here we are in the main office block of Harland & Wolff. This is the #1 drawing office, which is probably best known because it's where we designed the plans for the Titanic.
This is wonderful. What a grand room to be a drawing office.
Yeah. It all started with the dream of one man, Edward Harland. He came here in 1854, but at that time it was Hickson's shipyard.
Right, okay. So there was a history of shipbuilding
Yes,
here in
so he
Belfast.
came here as a manager, and he didn't like what he saw
Why not?
because it wasn't efficient. So in 1854, he was offered the chance to buy the shipyard. Hickson realised that he was never going to make any money out of it,
Right.
and he offered Harland a chance. I will sell you this lock, stock and barrel.
He raised the funds and teamed up with engineer Gustav Wolff to found Harland & Wolff.
Wolff was an excellent engineer, like himself. So Harland designed the hull, while Wolff designed the engines.
Their approach to shipbuilding enshrined Victorian ideals of efficiency, innovation and ingenuity. To maximise the capacity of their vessels, Harland came up with a new design, replacing the curved lower hull with a flat bottom, making more room for cargo.
He made it into a box, a complete box.
It became known as the Belfast Bottom. So this means that your capacity is much increased, and that's a capacity either for cargo
Yes.
or people, I suppose.
He actually increased the capacity of the carrying capacity of the ship by 50%.
Really?
Yes, in the holds.
These vessels were the container ships of their day, transporting goods, but also people, across the expanding empire.
As the ships became more and more reliable, the ship owners had a requirement to make the ships bigger and bigger and bigger, because the economy is in the scale. The larger the ship, actually the cheaper it is to actually run the ship.
As demand for bigger passenger liners grew, Harland & Wolff were commissioned to build the largest ship constructed to date. It was named the Oceanic. This was a golden age of British engineering. And to understand the scale of Victorian ambition, Tom is taking me to the very spot where the Oceanic was constructed.
This is Oceanic, you might say,
Oh, look at that.
with its clothes off.
Isn't that amazing?
Yep.
So this is the framework,
That's the framework. That's
the internal framework
yep,
of the
that's
ship.
the internal ship.
Its skeleton.
That's the side of the ship. That's the bottom part of the ship.
Yeah.
That's the other side. And this is the decks, the internal decks going across. And what you have here is another view of Oceanic.
Yeah.
And you see how long the ship is.
And look at these cranes and this gantry. How tall is this? This looks huge.
They are roughly 60 metres high.
Each supersized vessel required huge steel plates, grand interior fittings, and enormous engines.
But that gives you an idea of the scale. They were absolutely enormous. When we tested those engines, the ground for miles around vibrated, which was the power of those engines.
Yeah.
What we were doing with Oceanic was akin to the Americans going to the moon. You're pushing technology to the absolute limit of what is possible.
Yeah. Harland & Wolff turned Belfast into a shipbuilding centre of excellence, thanks to their engineering brilliance. Although the Oceanic has long since disappeared, we can use Tom's research to recreate the slipway and the magnificent liner herself. To create this 17,000-ton ship, steel is poured, rolled and shaped on site. The ship's frame, 215 metres long, is created by laying plates along the slipway and riveting them together. Everything is manoeuvred into place with the help of steam cranes running on the shipyard's railway and a gigantic gantry. When the hull is complete, the ship is launched into the water, and then fitted with 2 giant engines. It can carry nearly 2,000 passengers, the vast majority travelling in second and third class. As the Industrial Revolution steamed across Britain, there was a mass migration from the countryside to the towns. It was one of the biggest changes to human society since our Stone Age ancestors made the transition from being hunter-gatherers to being farmers. A great example of this was in Belfast, where tens of thousands of people poured in from the countryside to the town to feed the new industries. When Victoria came to the throne, the population of Belfast was 50,000, but by the middle of her reign, it had more than doubled. From the air, Ben can imagine just what a shock was in store for the economic migrants surging into Victorian Britain's towns and cities.
We're just in the countryside around Belfast here, and what a green and pleasant land this is. It's absolutely fantastic. And what a contrast it is with urban Belfast. This is the sort of place that people flooding into Belfast in the 19th century would have come from. And you get a real sense from up here how their lives must have been utterly transformed. You come from one of those little places down there, you maybe don't travel outside your village or not far from it, and then suddenly you're in this sprawling, expanding urban metropolis surrounded by the sound and fury of Victorian industry. Incredible.
With workers flooding into cities like Belfast, there would be a sudden and unprecedented demand for more housing. I've come to the Ulster Folk Museum, which includes some restored early Victorian houses, to meet Dr. Olwyn Purdue, an expert on the social changes that were happening in Belfast.
Come on inside.
So this is the early Victorian
This is the early
house?
Victorian house, yes.
This is tiny.
Isn't it so small?
So this is the sitting room?
This is everything.
This
What
is
you see here
everything?
is everything. These houses were absolutely tiny, as you can see, low roofs.
Yeah.
One sitting area, a small parlour out the back, a room upstairs,
Yeah.
maybe 2, and that was it.
A small house like this could have up to 20 people living in it. Wind your head as you come through here.
This is where all the business took place. So cooking, cleaning, washing clothes, everything happened in here.
Yeah.
And then as we go outside, you can see this is where the yard was.
It's a tiny outside space.
Absolutely tiny
Yeah.
outside space. The toilet.
So there is a toilet.
There is.
Yeah.
I think calling it a toilet's an exaggeration. It
Yeah.
was basically an ash pit. So you did what you had to do. The refuse then was taken out through the house.
What? So the refuse from the toilet has to be taken out through the place where you're preparing your food?
Yes, through the kitchen.
That must have been a problem.
It was
That
a
must have
major
created
problem. And
difficulties.
at that stage, deaths from diseases related to poor sanitation were endemic in the city.
In so many British towns and cities, crowded rows of jerry-built houses with poor sanitation led to epidemics of deadly diseases. Amidst the suffering, there emerged a new generation of social reformers like Charles Booth in London and Dr. Andrew Malcolm in Belfast, who wrote a report on the typhus outbreak of 1847.
So here we have a map which basically shows the areas most affected by the epidemic of 1847.
Well, this is most of the city.
It is actually, because all of this area here would have been made up of houses such as we're sitting in at the moment. And what they didn't really figure is that the River Blackstaff, which flows through this area, was really acting as an open sewer at this stage. And one of the things that Malcolm points out is the extent to which there's a correlation between proximity to the River Blackwater and the high mortality rates that we see in the epidemic of 1847. So these were terrible years for the city.
As in other towns and cities across Britain, social reformers in Belfast prompted the introduction of new legislation which would eventually lead to vastly improved housing.
Public Health Acts, Town Improvement Acts, we start seeing those being brought in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s. And at that stage then we start to see land becomes available around Belfast and developers start building houses, and we start then to see the red brick terraces that Belfast is known for, and so many Victorian cities is such a familiar sight.
The new houses had running water, better sanitation and much more space for each family. To keep costs down, developers built in rows, giving birth to the Victorian terraced house, still a familiar and much-loved feature of our towns today. In the last 30 years of Victoria's reign, over 2 million new houses were built in Britain. 50,000 of those were in Belfast.
From up here, you can see so much that you just can't grasp on the ground. The slums have been replaced by neat rows of terraced housing, wide boulevards, and more amenities were built: schools, hospitals, churches.
I'm in search of Victorian Britain, and there really is no better place to be than Belfast. I've already seen how, like so many towns in the 19th century, industrialisation led to rapid growth here. Now I want to discover how people were adapting to a new urban lifestyle. With mass migration from the countryside to the rapidly expanding towns, the working class people found themselves with two previously unheard of luxuries: regular leisure time and cash on the hip. A new entertainment industry emerged. Originally just a stage in the back of a pub, establishments grew larger and more formal until we had the fully fledged Victorian Music Hall. This recreated one still pulls in punters today, and Dr. Mark Phelan has studied the history that inspired it. Mark, this is a fantastic recreation. Is it very much a working class entertainment that we're talking about?
Largely speaking, I mean, you have suddenly a rapidly developed working class population who have very little forms of entertainment or recreation available to them. And the music hall was very much designed for that audience in mind.
Mark has brought along a programme from the opening season of one of Belfast's great music halls, the Empire Theatre of Varieties, and it provides a fantastic insight into the types of entertainment enjoyed by the Victorian working class. What's going on here then?
Well, I think a picture tells 1,000 words. I mean, you can see the appeal to working class kind of audience who are in many ways stifled and stultified by requirements of respectable society to behave.
But this is not a reputable member of Victorian society, is it?
No. She's something of a harlot with an hourglass figure. She's probably going to dance, perform and sing something rather salacious, you know, salted with a lot of innuendo and double meaning. And that's exactly the kind of the risky entertainment that the punters wanted. They wanted scantily clad women flashing their underwear at the gallery patrons and the gods.
So what kind of acts would there have been on the stage?
I mean, the variety is vertiginous. On one night, you can have acrobats and illusionists and escapologists and equilibrists and trick cyclists and cowboy hypnotists and burlesque trapezeists, and that could just be on Tuesday.
Perhaps the rowdiest audiences of all were the hard-drinking dockworkers and shipbuilders.
It was famously said by touring theatricals, if you could survive Belfast and Glasgow, you could survive anywhere.
Really?
Yeah. And all our venues had enormous nets installed at the front of the stage to protect the audience from fusillades of objects flung at the actors, known locally as Belfast confetti.
Belfast confetti?
Well, that was basically empty porter bottles and rivets and bricks, the pieces of metal punched out from the shipyards.
Mark has uncovered rare, early footage of one act that was on the programme on the Empire's opening night.
Well, Little Tich was one of the luminaries who came from the London stage. He was 4 foot tall, he had 5 fingers and thumbs, he had 6 toes, 38-inch shoes, and for all of the comic clumsiness, it's a remarkably virtuoso performance to carry it off, given the size of him.
He's doing the splits. The tiny man in the top hat would inspire some of the giants of 20th century comedy.
In some of the top hat kind of routines and rituals, we can see shadows of Charlie Chaplin, but also, obviously, Laurel and Hardy. And that's part of the rich genealogy of performance.
There are very few Victorian music halls left in Britain. A shopping centre now stands on the site of the once great Empire Theatre of Varieties. But for the first time, with the magic of CGI, we can bring it back to life. The theatre opens in 1894. Its size and grandeur shows how popular music hall culture has become by the late Victorian era. The auditorium can seat over 1,000 people. Unlike most early music halls, it has boxes for the wealthiest. But care has been taken to ensure the working class regulars also have a good view. The theatre is described as being amongst the most elegant in the country. It has electric lighting, luxurious decor, and a magnificent Moorish-inspired exterior. But there was also unemployment and poverty amongst the new urban working class, and that gave rise to an epidemic of crime in the crowded town. The Victorians set about establishing police forces across the country and embarked on a massive prison building programme. One of the best preserved is here in Belfast. Directly opposite stands the imposing but now dilapidated courthouse. To find out how this city dealt with rising lawlessness, I'm meeting Dr. Elaine Farrell, an expert on the period. So what was happening in terms of law and order during the Victorian period?
So with the increase in population, obviously that means people trying to get work and migrating to the city and just finding it quite difficult. There could be quite a lot of poverty, there could be a lot of begging, which of course was a crime, and there would be some prostitution, drunkenness, and all of those people ended up then here in the courthouse.
And how harsh was the punishment compared with today's standards?
Well, for certain crimes, it would be very, very harsh. So, you know, stealing an apple from a shop front or from a market stall, or stealing a pair of stockings could result in quite a harsh punishment, particularly for somebody who had committed that crime before.
Right.
And they could find themselves serving quite a lengthy period over in Crumlin Road Jail.
From the moment of their conviction, Victorian criminals would be kept isolated from the rest of society. A chilling artefact of that harsh approach to crime and punishment still survives beneath the Belfast street, a tunnel linking the courthouse straight to the jail. It's just extraordinary to think all those people that have walked along this tunnel. It's hard to imagine a more haunting place, especially as this only ceased to be a working prison in 1996. The Crumlin Road Jail was a pioneering design to exert a big brother-like control over inmates. And the cells are down there, are they?
The cells are in all the wings. We can see that there's 4 wings then radiating off this central hub. So the staff members could see what the prisoners are doing, if they're working, if somebody is trying to escape. The idea was that whatever a person is doing, they have the potential to be watched. So they might not necessarily be watched, but the potential is there.
Crumlin Road was the first prison in Ireland to utilise this new design, a Victorian version of CCTV. And it broke with the previous convention of throwing prisoners together in large cells. Now, when prisoners weren't being put to work, they were locked up alone.
The only place where the criminals actually were in association, where they were working together, would be in the kitchen when they're working as cooks, and sometimes when they were cleaning.
Inside, you get an idea of just how disturbing it must have been to be locked up here.
You might hear the keys maybe of staff walking up and down, you might hear footsteps, you might hear some prisoners maybe screaming if they're in pain. It's a very small cell, and I think the walls could close in on people too.
The isolation proved too much for some.
There's one very sad case of a 13-year-old boy, Patrick McGee, who was sent to prison for 3 months for stealing stockings. And on the day he entered in 1858, he was found hanging from the window in his cell.
The day he came in.
Elaine's shutting me in so I can see for myself how claustrophobic it must have been. I've seen how Belfast was being transformed into a quintessential Victorian town in just a generation, and how harsh life could be if you fell foul of the law. But at the other extreme, burgeoning industry and mass migration to the cities could bring great wealth and success. For those lucky enough to own a factory or mill, there were fortunes to be made. This prosperity was reflected in the grand public buildings that appeared in Victorian towns, and Belfast was no exception.
A new urban elite emerged, industrialists, merchants. They didn't want their city to be just any old city. They wanted the best city in the world, and you can see that in the architecture. There's a whole suite of buildings that are just full of civic pride. Look at the City Hall, it's an incredible building. And then the commercial power is expressed in the banks, the insurance buildings I can see. It's clearly just a massively thriving and proud place in the Victorian era.
Their investment paid off, and in 1888, Queen Victoria granted Belfast city status. Central Belfast is still packed with grand Victorian architecture. This is a great example, and I've come here to discover how this newfound affluence impacted on the lives of the more fortunate. This place is absolutely gorgeous. This was once Belfast's greatest bank. It was a place that aspiring industrialists would have come to secure their loans and then, if they were successful, to bank their fortunes. They were part of a new world where technology was not only making it possible to accumulate wealth in new ways, but to share information. Developments in printing meant that books were being published in unprecedented numbers, and Belfast became a major publishing city. One of the things that people were reading about was how to behave in this rapidly changing society. All over Victorian England, the newly wealthy were studying etiquette manuals. In towns like Belfast, without a large established gentry to lead by example, these guides were particularly important.
Hello, Tony.
Today, the Old Ulster Bank is one of Belfast's poshest hotels. And I'm meeting etiquette expert Dr. Tony Weller here.
If I was a lady arriving in Belfast, how would I know how to behave in polite society?
Well, your key thing would be to be received into polite society. So you would want to call on your acquaintances here or have people call upon you. And if you didn't know how to do that, one of the things you could do was to consult etiquette books or etiquette guides, which are widely published throughout this period.
Were these books really for people who were moving up in society?
Yeah, absolutely. Before industrialisation, before the Victorian period, there wasn't really a middle class in the way that we understand it now with Victorians. It was very much something that was created by the new wealth of industrialisation. So you were suddenly thrust together in these new towns like Belfast, meeting people in train stations, new railway stations or department stores, and you had to have some way of navigating those circumstances, those social situations. And these etiquette books, in a way, helped you do that.
Show me a little bit from this book, then.
This one's from slightly later in the century. This is written by an Irish lady, Lady Colin Campbell, in 1893. And it has quite a nice section on afternoon tea as well.
Tea is supposed to be essentially the ladies' meal. So it was not made for men then, really? It was very much seen as a ladies' drink?
It was a social event. The tea and cakes were just there to give you something to do with your hands while you talked and made conversation and made connections and found out the gossip of the day.
Afternoon tea offered Victorian ladies the chance to show off their newly learned manners, a symbol of their new wealth, status and success. I'm not sure how I would have been received. Oh, look at this.
Thank you very much.
That's amazing. Look at those cakes. That's the smallest macaroon I've ever seen, that one there.
They're beautiful. They're works of art, aren't they?
They're gorgeous, yeah.
Thank you.
I did have my elbows on the table. I presume that was
It's very uncouth of you.
Yeah, sorry. I've got a lot to learn. Can I pour the tea?
Well, I should pour the tea as the hostess.
What else should and shouldn't I be doing at the tea table?
Well, there was quite a long list of conventional do's and don'ts. Never permit yourself to use grand gestures. Never make noises with the mouth or the throat. Never leave your seat with food in the mouth. Never explain at the table why certain foods might disagree with you. So it's quite a long list of things to remember to do.
So, have I passed the test? Will you be inviting me back?
Well, I think you may need to go and consult your etiquette books on some of the finer detail, but it's been a pleasure to have you here for afternoon tea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure I'll be better behaved next time. It wasn't only tea that was becoming cheaper and more readily available to Victorian city dwellers. By the end of Victoria's reign, Belfast was one of the busiest ports of an empire that took in a quarter of the world's land surface. I've come to the rather grand Harbour Commissioner's office, where I'm going to get my hands on a historical record that perfectly illustrates the explosion in international trade during Victoria's reign. These are the accounts of the Belfast Harbour Commissioners, and what I want to find is the record of the tonnage. There we go, year by year, the tonnage being cleared from the port of Belfast, and it goes right back to 1837, so the beginning of Victoria's reign. And at that point, 288,143 tonnes of goods were being cleared from the port. And then it just increases year on year. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger until we get to the end of Victoria's reign. So 1901, we have then got 2.3 million tonnes of goods coming through the port. It's quite extraordinary. So huge expansion, but we've also got some details about what exactly was coming in and going out. So we've got things like ale and beer coming in, we've got apples and pears, chalk and charcoal and cheese and cider and cigars. You just get this impression of all of these commodities coming in and people suddenly having access to an incredibly wide range of goods that they just haven't had access to before. And this is interesting, umbrellas. 15 tonnes of umbrellas are coming in each year. And if we look at the export, only 1 tonne being exported, so 14 tonnes are staying here. A lot of umbrellas. And I suspect the people of Belfast still need quite a few. With a previously unimaginable range of goods now available, the well-to-do of late Victorian Britain would have splashed their cash in places like this. Belfast St George's Market, built in the 1890s and now restored to its former glory. These establishments sold an ever-increasing variety and volume of goods produced at home and around the empire, laying the foundations for our contemporary consumerist culture. The city's motto is inscribed on the Romanesque arches of the market, Pro tanto quid retribuamus. What shall we give in return for so much? It's an expression of thankfulness that may well have been shared by millions of newly rich city dwellers across Victorian Britain. Queen Victoria died in 1901. Her reign had seen dramatic changes across the country, and perhaps nowhere more so than Belfast. Belfast grew from a town of 20,000 in 1800 to a city of 350,000 by the end of the century. New industrial technology unleashes potential for Belfast's first major industry, linen. By dredging the river, a new port is created, setting the stage for the growth of a titanic shipbuilding industry. hundreds of thousands of people flock into Belfast. With cash in their pockets and the luxury of leisure time, for the masses, a whole new entertainment industry grows up. It's a giant leap forward. The legacy of that astonishing 19th century transformation is woven into the fabric of modern Belfast, a city that was born in the Victorian era, Britain's most Victorian town.